I'm Vivian Lee. A new work of historical fiction, Number 10 Doyers Street, is set during the fight to save Manhattan's Chinatown in the early 1900s. Its main character is the narrator, a South Asian woman who's also covering the real-life trial of gang leader Mock Duck, who's fighting for custody of his child.
Mock Duck had this reputation. He was 27 at the time. He was this ruthless gangster, but what a lot of people didn't know is that he had this little adopted daughter who was 6 years old, who he really loved, and she lived with him on 10 Doyers Street.
The street that gives Radha Vatsal's mystery novel its title was teeming with life in the turn of the 20th century, as depicted in this postcard from 1898. It was also the most murderous street in the country for decades because of gangsters. Police and the press at the time dubbed Doyers Street the Bloody Angle.
Bloody Angle because it had this sort of very sharp angle, but also because there were shootouts. So many shootouts took place.
Number 10 Doyers Street opens, in fact, with a gangland shooting that actually happened at the Chinese Opera House across the street from Mock Duck's apartment. Members of Mock Duck's gang, the Hip Sing Tong, targeted rivals in the On Leong Tong during a live performance.
The theater was supposed to be neutral territory, no violence was supposed to happen here, and this sort of caused a consternation within the community and outside.
From there, the story of the Opera House slayings intersects with a famous child custody case. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, also known as the Jerry Society, forcibly removed Mock Duck's daughter from their home. A sensational New York Times article from 1907 reported that a, quote, white girl, 6 years old, was practically a prisoner, end quote.
Cruelty sought at Mock Duck's. But the way the story was written, it was quite lengthy. It was horribly racist, but then also Mock Duck had this wife and this child, and he had an Irish maid in the story. And so I thought, what is going on? And the idea that this young gangster in his 20s, who at that time I had not heard of, cared so much about his young daughter. And then I just felt like I had to look into that story and see what was going on.
Mock Duck and his real-life arch-rival, Tom Lee of the On Leong Tong, provide Number 10 Doyers Street its spirit. Mock Duck, born Cy Wing Mock, even has his own entry in the Museum of the City of New York's archives. Other historical events and people provide the texture of the rapidly modernizing city in 1907. The ambitious New York City Mayor George B. McClellan, Jr., his campaign to build the Catskill Aqueduct that he championed, George Washington Plunkett, a politician who openly cheered political graft, and the murder trial of multimillionaire Harry Thaw, accused of killing in cold blood the architect of the Washington Square Arch.
Thaw shoots Stanford White on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden, so that's kind of like the O.J. Simpson trial of the day. And it turns out that Mock and Harry Thaw have used the same lawyer, this man called Daniel O'Reilly, and then I start seeing these stories that the city at the same time is trying to raise Chinatown and replace it with the park. So there was a lot going on, and I felt, you could have done the story that's just like a domestic drama with Mock Duck and his daughter and their court case, but I felt his story and his relationship to Chinatown was also part of a larger story about Chinatown and its relationship to New York City.
The novel also mentions Dr. Anandabai Joshi, the first South Asian woman to become a doctor in the U.S., and Pandita Ramabai, a social reformer who wrote a book about American life. Vatsal says she discovered their histories in 19th century USA after she chose to model the narrator after herself, a woman journalist and Indian immigrant.
I came here when I was quite young, when I was 16, and so I bring my immigrant perspective as a fellow Asian, but a South Asian, not an East Asian, to the story, and I wanted the narrator to reflect that. But then, in my mind, I was like, oh, but that's impossible. There were no people from South Asia in New York at the time. I discovered, in fact, there had been people from India who came to the US in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Our own prejudices keep us from seeing that the past was actually, in many ways, much more modern, much more open-minded than we kind of give it credit for.
Number 10 Doyer Street surfaces new perspectives about a beloved, ever-changing neighborhood still fighting to survive in its dynamic city. For Asian American Life, I'm Vivian Lee.